This is, sorry if I pronounce this wrong, AnderScions. It's a team made up of 3 Chevening alumni from Morocco, Philippines, and India. Presenting will be Ronaldo Gutiérrez, and answering questions in the chat is Abhinav Soman. Over to you.
Okay, good day, everyone. Let me take this opportunity to briefly explain the inspiration for our team name, AnderScions. It's actually inspired by Robert Anderson from Scotland. He's credited for having invented the first electric vehicle. So we simply tweaked his name to make it more gender inclusive. So next slide, please. So the problem is that according to the International Energy Agency, 25% of greenhouse gas emissions come from the transportation. It's actually the fastest growing sector in absolute terms. Now, a dozen or so countries have actually made commitments beginning 2025 with Norway as the most ambitious to phase out 100% the sale or registration of new vehicles running on internal combustion engines or ICEs. In layperson's terms, that means running on petrol or gasoline. This is all good, except that there are 1.4 billion estimated vehicles on the road right now running on petrol, and that usual phase-out programs actually pose problems on recycling. In addition to that, there's also the unintended consequence of dumping in developing countries. So we're asking, how can the transition to EVs make a dent, especially in developing countries, considering that the earliest commitments coming from developing countries for a phase out would begin somewhere around 2050. Next slide, please. Our solution is to provide an enabling environment for retrofitting by original equipment manufacturers or OEMs. Our contribution to this whole effort to accelerate the switch to EVs is by introducing the OEMs to the equation. Why this is so? Because retrofitting is actually an existing technology. It's happening as we speak, except that it's happening at a very small scale, usually a specialist trade involving vintage car owners. By introducing the OEMs into the picture, we can achieve scale, replicability, and accessibility. But for that to happen, we have to have the regulatory and legal environment so that incentives could be put in place to spur the demand, both financial and non-financial incentives, and also provide support services so that both the demand and the supply side of the equation can actually begin. Next slide, please. The impact, we believe, is going to be very significant because it's going to affect the existing stock of vehicles that are currently producing the greenhouse gases. More than that, it's going to happen a lot earlier than 2030 or 2035. It can happen as we speak. Now, consider also the fact that a vehicle has an average lifespan of between 15 to 18 years. So even if in Norway, they banned new vehicles by 2025, it would take another 15 or 18 years for the last petrol-based fuel to stop emitting greenhouse gases. It will also reduce the challenges to recycling, deter perhaps the problem of dumping, and also reduce the stress on having the demand for raw materials for new cars because we're going to use the same vehicles. It will definitely boost local employment because the retrofitting will be happening where the service centers of each OEM is in every country where the cars are. So it's a bit democratized in that sense. And because retrofitting costs less than a brand new vehicle, there will be less subsidies or even perhaps bigger subsidies, except that there are more beneficiaries. It would also mean better health for street workers, like traffic enforcers, street vendors, and everyone, the joggers and the pedestrians. It would also mean consumer product safety because nobody knows better the technical and design specifications of each car model than the original manufacturers themselves. At the end of the day, it represents more choices because our policy doesn't detract from pursuing a sustainable mass transportation program.
One minute remaining.
Thank you for pursuing a phase out. It simply represents another choice that probably would be suitable for one's budget. Next slide, please. For implementation, we need to identify countries and OEMs to champion the policy. We need to begin creating awareness on the advantages of EVs and the benefits of retrofitting, particularly because retrofitting can actually pay for itself in the long run, considering the prices of fuel right now. We need to start establishing and expanding charging infrastructure to reduce range anxiety, which is identified as one of the biggest concerns among consumers, and we can explore community-based charging. We need to start capacity building for future workers on EVs, and that to include women. We have to design subsidy programs, elicit broad-based support, and provide certification testing protocols for retrofitted vehicles to make sure that each one that hits the streets is roadworthy. Next slide, please. In conclusion, through this proposal, we hope that we can correct our course toward the green future in transportation that Robert Anderson envisioned for us nearly 2 centuries ago. Thank you very much. That ends our presentation. We're open to your questions.
Thank you very much, Team EV AnderScions. Got it wrong again. Science, there we go. Thank you. I think we do have a question from Niti there. We'll hand over to you.
Yeah, very quick question, Ron. One is, what is the enabling policy environment you foresee which would need to facilitate the retrofitting, and what is the incentive for people to retrofit, the cost and the payback period? Why would they want to do it?
Okay, well, first of all, the enabling policy environment that we want is to have the main stakeholders like the automobile industry, the government, and the consumers, and also the power industry, of course, so that we can sit together and devise ways by which we can wean ourselves from the petrol-based transport industry. Now, this would require the government intervention because, unfortunately, the industry, automobile industry, is locked into this business model wherein all they want is always something new. No? Now, for the consumers, this is actually a very attractive proposition because the cost of running an EV, a retrofitted EV, is actually a lot cheaper than buying a new one. Even if it's, even if you can afford it, it's really not available especially in developing countries. But for countries, especially in Southeast Asia, which are locked into some financial plans, so on and so forth, for the next 10 to 15 years, buying a new one is not really an option. But converting your car into an EV, considering the traffic situation in many cities in developing countries, actually has multi-co benefits. No? So from the clean air alone, you would want to go into retrofitting. On top of the fact that people actually don't know that you need less maintenance from the fact that you have less running equipment in an EV compared to an ICE, or internal combustion engine, and the cost is actually a lot lower than the current oil prices. So there are plenty of co-benefits that can come aside from the cost and why you would want to retrofit. Thank you for the question, Nita.
Thanks very much. You can see lots of vintage cars if they're plugged into the electric ports.